Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's forum. I am Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. We are the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. And this month, we're focusing on hitting the reset button. As you know, there's a whole lot going on this year, and it's normal to engage in planning, midstream. And when I say midstream, I'm talking about mid-year, and get a sense for, who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. And that's normal. But in this year, 2020, it's even more critical that we engage in those types of exercises as nonprofits, as well as leaders, given the changes in the environment due to COVID-19. So we started off by assessing our individual leadership skills. And then we also, did some reflections on those leadership skills. And now we're going to take it a step higher and focus on our organization skills. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time focusing on talking about capacity building, what it is, and how you can assess your capacity. And then, given your findings from your leadership assessments, as well as your findings from this assessment of your organization, then develop a blueprint for moving forward given the current environment. Alrighty, so if you can just give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen, share our presentation with you. Alrighty. All right, so today's topic is how to develop a blueprint for sustainability for your nonprofit. And just so you know, when we talk about developing a blueprint, we're really talking about developing a plan of action. And to give you a little bit of information about nonprofit Utopia, we were founded a couple years ago, and we're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We have an online community. We also do consulting, we do coaching, and we also have courses on demand. And we're going to be expanding our courses as well as our coaching this fall. Alrighty, so we have created a safe environment within our community in which nonprofit practitioners can talk about issues of concern to them, bounce ideas off and all that good stuff. And the good thing about nonprofit Utopia is what goes on in nonprofit Utopia stays in nonprofit Utopia. It's a very private group. We're not an exclusive group. We do have a membership fee, but it is not exclusive. The people who will get the most bang for the buck would be those emerging leaders who want to really make a difference, not only in terms of their leadership skills, but also strengthen their organizations and move them towards sustainability. And in this instance, when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about making sure that the organizations can make an impact to their communities for the long term. And our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And ideally, we want to do this around the world. And we do this through professional development and networking opportunities. And, obviously, in the age of COVID-19, the networking will be more of a virtual nature than in person. But the overarching goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need in order to make a stronger organization, improve their own leadership skills, and make a greater impact to their clients as well as their communities. And we've got pretty high caliber people in the group who can really help one another out. Okay, and our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for up to 50,000 emerging nonprofit leaders around the world between now and 2033. If you want to find out more about us, you can visit us at nonprofitutopia.com. If you're interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. You can find out more about us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. I want to give you a little bit of information about myself. Again, my name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I'm also the host of the Nonprofit Utopia podcast. We're on hiatus until September. We've got a lot going on. And my approach is to work with clients to help them find the answers to some of their most pressing problems. They might have questions like, how do I start a new nonprofit organization and make sure that I'm doing the right things? How do I make sure that I file my paperwork so that I'm not in trouble? Where can I find really good board members who buy into my vision and who are willing to fundraise, right? And if they're not willing, how do I motivate them to engage in fundraising? Other questions might include, how do we put together a collaborative of other organizations such that we're strengthening not only our own capacity to lead, but we're also increasing the capacity of the collective itself. Alrighty, so over the years, I've helped over 750 people to improve their leadership skills, to raise money, to strengthen organizations. And I've helped raise over $100 million. And this is through proposal writing, through fundraising, and mostly through technical assistance, helping people to develop their own ability to engage in fundraising and write proposals. So I want to step back a little bit further before we really get into the meat of why we're here. And the reason we're here is to show you how to develop a blueprint for long-term sustainability for your organization. Just want to step back and share a few definitions and give you context and make sure that we're all on the same page. So when we're talking about capacity building, generally speaking, in the nonprofit Utopia community, we are speaking about the organization's ability to provide programs and services in a manner that's going to create impact to its clients and communities. And sometimes that's couched in, the number of people served, the quality of service, and the magnitude of the change. So when we're talking about capacity, those are the types of things that we're talking about. And some of the indicators of capacity, or things that we might look at in terms of measuring capacity, would be things like board governance. And when we're talking about board governance, we're talking about how the board actually leads the organization and guides the organization and exercises stewardship over the asset, right? So we're also looking at leadership, we're looking at financial management, fundraising, human resources, impact, program management, and networking. And those are some of the most common indicators that your more prominent foundations will be looking at when they assess your ability as a nonprofit organization. Other things could include things like technology. So basically, when you're doing an assessment of your capacity, you're looking at a broad number of factors, or you could be focusing on a single factor. And one example could be technology. An assessment is basically, gathering data and information on a particular process and using those data to make certain assumptions and conclusions. And your assessments can be used to inform board and management decisions, strategic plans, program proposals, program design, program evaluation, and your capacity building processes in general. And capacity building processes, could be things like leadership development, fundraising, and financial management, and all that good stuff. So in order to know what areas to strengthen, you need to really step back and make an assessment. And there are a number of tools that you can use to develop these assessments. You can use surveys and questionnaires, you can use interviews, you can use observation, be a fly on the wall during meetings, or observing a program in action. You can use checklists, you can use document reviews. And again, these are some of your more common tools. And the benefits of assessment are many. You can use assessments to identify key issues and make better decisions as managers, better decisions as board members. You can also develop what we call evidence-based strategic plans, programs, and evaluations. And when we talk about being evidence-based, we're talking about being able to make sure that whatever decisions we make or whatever conclusions we come up with in these processes are backed up by data, right? So an assessment helps you to develop what we call that baseline data. So this is going to be that starting point. And then if you want, you can do an assessment after, to determine growth. So assessments, again, can be used to track your growth and development over time, and they can also be used to better communicate with stakeholders. It gives a common language to identify problems and to identify ways you're going to address those problems. And that language becomes common throughout your organization and within the areas of communication for your various stakeholders. And a really good benefit of assessment is your ability to raise funds. Organizations that deal with capacity building assessments, regardless of whatever the capacity building assessment tool is or the assessment itself is focusing on, they tend to raise more money. I've worked with clients, I've helped them to raise hundreds of thousands and even in some cases millions of dollars just as a result of going through the assessment process, because the assessment um, gives a really good indicator of what the potential is depending on the scope of the assessment. The more comprehensive the assessment, the greater your chances are of making significant sweeping improvement in your organization, and the greater your chances are of raising more money. Alrighty, so the first thing you want to do is determine your purpose. And in this case, we're not talking about the organizational purpose. We're talking about the purpose or your why for even engaging in the assessment process. Why are you doing this and what's going to be the scope? Are you doing the assessment because a funder asked you to? Are you doing an assessment just to get a sense for what your organization's capacity is within the scope of the environment and the problems that are within the environment? Are you looking to do an assessment that will look at the sweeping totality, I guess, in general for the organization, or are you just focusing on one particular area? So are you trying to improve capacity for a single program? Are you trying to improve capacity for a single function, such as fundraising? Are you trying to build capacity for the whole organization and create a more efficient structure, or create what we call the infrastructure, or those mechanisms and processes that will help you to make a bigger impact to more people as a result of having a stronger organization? So you really got to think about why you're going to engage in this capacity building assessment. And then the next step is obviously to actually do the work of conducting the assessment. And what we have here, I designed an organizational capacity assessment tool, and this is a more comprehensive assessment. And this helps organizations to assess their capacity in 8 different areas. And what you'll be seeing on the next few slides will be screenshots from different sections of the assessment. And bear with me, I made my move too soon. I just want to make sure that you can see the entire, or the most important parts of the assessment tool. All right, so again, this is focusing on 8 different areas. It's not necessarily meant to be a scientific tool. It's meant to be more of a tool for helping you to make decisions and helping you to get a snapshot of the areas that you're weakest in, the areas that you're strongest in, and then prioritizing the issues that you want to address. All right. So people who are members of the nonprofit Utopia community, they will get a hard copy of this tool that they can download and they can score it themselves. And then there'll be a workbook available that will help them to actually write their plans. And then those plans they can use to actually shop around to different funders, share with funders um, what it is that they're focusing on in order to strengthen their capacity to serve organizations. They can also use the results to discuss with their board, discuss with their management team, et cetera, et cetera. So this first section here is dealing with board governance. And the way this tool works is, again, you're looking at 8 different factors, and then you're going to, for the first 7 factors, rate yourself or your organization on a scale of 1 to 5 in each one of those indicators. And then on this far right column, you'll indicate the score. You will total those 5 scores, and then you'll give yourself an average, and that'll give you a snapshot, right? So in the case of board governance, that first question asks the degree to which you agree with each of these statements, right? So the first one is the board of directors is actively involved in setting strategic direction, and that includes strategic planning, developing organizational policies, fundraising, financial management, and program oversight. So if you were completing this tool, you would rate your organization's ability or their actual practice on a scale of 1 to 5, and then you will write that score here. So you can either put a checkbox or X here, and then you'll actually write the score here. Another example is the organization's bylaws are updated as necessary, and they're supported by a system of board and management policies and procedures. The bylaws are enforced by the board of directors. So as you can see, it's not enough to have these systems in place, but the question is also asking, do you have leadership that will actually step in and make sure that all the rules are being adhered to? All right, so I'm not going to read all of these, but this just gives you an indicator of the types of things that are being assessed. And these are very common practices. These are what we call best practices that nonprofits are engaging in. And this is basically this gives you a sense for whether or not you're adhering to best practices or the degree to which you are. All right, so the second section is on financial management, and you would rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 on all of these questions. So in this area, you give yourself a rating 1 to 5, and then in this column, you actually write the number down. So it's a checkbox or an X here, and then you give the actual score here. So the financial management questions include, okay, here's number 1. The organization maintains an automated accounting system that tracks revenues and expenditures. So not only does it track revenues and expenditures, but the question asks, can you do it by grant sources? And that's really important because you might have, at the drop of a hat, a funder wanting to have an accounting of how you spent their money, right? And being able to track the finances by funder, it helps you to actually give cleaner reports, save time on the reporting process. And then the second question here is, there's a current financial policies and procedures manual that's been adopted by the board of directors and conforms to generally accepted accounting principles, or what we would call GAAP. All right, so the questions continue down that line. And basically, the focus here is to get a sense for whether or not you have sound financial management controls. Are there separations of duties? Are you keeping your reports in a manner that will help you to make efficient and sound management decisions? The next area is fundraising. And I think fundraising, you pretty much know what that is. Your ability to raise resources for programs and services so that you can meet your mission. So in this case, the indicators are demonstrated by those 5 questions. The last question here is, there is a long-range fundraising plan in place, and it's consistent with the organizational budget, the staffing plans, programs, strategic plans, and cash flow projections. So basically, the rationale for the way these questions are, not only are they meant to help you get a sense for whether or not you're following best practices, but also to keep you in the mindset that fundraising is not to be done in a vacuum. Fundraising is very much so to be integrated into every program, every service, every administrative activity, every project, every process of your organization. And this will give you an opportunity to assess the degree to which you're doing that. And, again, there are 5 questions, and, we don't have enough time for me to go into all of those questions. All right, so the next section is human resources. And this is geared to get a sense for, the capabilities of your personnel, and how your personnel is actually helping you to meet your mission. All right, so the first question here is, has the staff the staff has the education, certifications, licenses, knowledge, and skills to perform the tasks for which they were hired? And then you would rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. And when I say yourself, I'm talking about your organization. On a scale of 1 to 5, you do a check or X here, and then you write the actual score. Another statement is, the staff is well versed on the issues and latest developments that impact their ability to develop programs to serve the needs of the organization's clients. So you want to make sure that your staff is constantly getting educated, that they're not staying stagnant. One of the things that typically holds nonprofits back, further behind than their for-profit counterparts, is the fact that they tend to not be as up to speed on some of the latest developments in terms of technology and some of the latest business practices. And, that's just typical of the nonprofit sector. There are, groups that are nimble and innovative, but for the most part, nonprofits are a little bit more slow moving than their for-profit counterparts. And the next set of statements or questions focus on impact. And in this case, when we're talking about impact, we're looking at your ability to make a difference in the community, but you don't know whether or not you have made a difference in the community unless you have been intentional about the type of change that you want to make, the data that you're collecting, and the evidence that you have actually made the change. So that's what this series of questions and statements are getting to. So in this section, the first statement is, the organization regularly engages in community assessment and uses the results to identify key issues. So in this particular statement, you want to make sure that you're engaging consistently in activities that are going to help you to consistently meet the needs of the community. And we know that the needs of the community are always changing. And one way to keep up with the changes is to engage in community assessment. The second statement is the organization is clear on the problems it wants to address, the root causes, and has identified solutions and specific targets for intervention. So again, we don't have time to go through all of these, but this gives you a sense for the types of activities in which you should be engaged and the reasons why you should be engaged in those activities. The next one is program management. And the questions here, again, there are 5 questions that you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. And the first question is, the programs are grounded in the organization's theory of change and are consistent with the strategic plan set by the board of directors. So this is getting at whether or not you are creating an environment where you can actually develop what we would call evidence-based programming, and that your programming is in response to the issues that are going on in the community, and you're taking those data and actually developing programs that will help you to address the needs in the community, and you're doing it in a methodical way, in a way that sets up, um, sets up your ability to evaluate it, and it's grounded in theory, but it's also practical, and it's grounded in the data. It's evidence-based. You're not just grasping for straws. Sometimes we get so emotional in our approaches that we haven't really tested whether or not our approaches are working. And then the second question is, there are systems in place to track programs' progress towards financial as well as programmatic goals and objectives. So again, making sure that not only are your programs grounded in reality, and when I say reality, grounded in the reality of what's going on in the community, but you're actually able to, after you develop your goals and your desired outcomes, you have some data that you're collecting and tracking over time that will prove that you're moving toward those outcomes that you desire. And if you're not, it gives you the information that will help you to make the appropriate changes. So this question is helping you flesh out the degree to which you engage in those types of processes. And then over time, you can actually, if you're not, it gives you an indicator of the things that you need to be doing. All righty. And then the last part in the first section is networking. So in this case, we're not talking about IT per se when we're talking about networking. We're talking about the networks within which your organization is a part within the community. Are you networked to people, places, institutions that can help you really get the job done? And the larger your networks, the greater your capacity to really make an impact. So the first statement here is board and staff maintain healthy relationships with the organization's clients and the community. And you rate your organization on a scale of 1 to 5. And then the last question, attendees of the organization's special events include people from a wide spectrum, and that includes clients, board members, members of the philanthropic community, local community members, and elected officials. And, there are 3 other questions in between. And after you go through those first 7 sections, you want to do a grand total score, and then you want to do an average score for the whole. So you're doing subtotals for each individual section and you're averaging, and then you're doing a grand total for the whole, um, for the whole first 7 parts, and then you're getting a weighted average there. Okay, and this second section is GATA Readiness. And GATA stands for Grants Accountability and Transparency Act. And that was an act that was passed in the Illinois legislature under Governor Pat Quinn, making sure that they can hold organizations accountable, those organizations that are getting state grants. So they have a system that is put in place very similar, and in fact is more rigid or more rigorous than the federal government in terms of what they're looking for. So part of what they have done is required that you go through a pre-qualification process. At the federal level, you have to go through a pre-qualification process as well, but it's not quite as comprehensive as the Illinois plan, their process. And if you are ready to apply for Illinois state funds, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be ready to apply for federal funds. Now, going through this process doesn't guarantee that you're going to get funding, but I just thought it would be very helpful for you to understand what is required before you actually apply for state funds. All right, so this is basically a checklist of things that you have to have in place. So if you are missing any of these areas, then you're not going to be pre-qualified. With the state, is all or nothing in order for you to go ahead and apply. And when I say the state, I'm talking about the state of Illinois. So this first question is, the organization has gone through the GATA authentication process on the illinois.gov authentication portal. Either you have or you haven't, so it's yes or no. You give yourself a 5 for every yes, give yourself a 0 for every no. The only way you're going to be qualified to apply for state funds is if you have yeses on all of these areas. All right, so after you fill out the assessment, then you're gonna reflect on what the data are telling you. So what areas did you score the highest? And what areas did you score the lowest? And what patterns are you seeing, in certain sections and throughout the whole assessment? And if you're a member of the nonprofit Utopia community, we have a workbook. So not only do you have access to that assessment tool, but we have a workbook to help you think through these questions. And then the answers to these questions will actually be used for you to come up with the plan. And then you can develop that capacity building plan, and you can share those results with your funders, share the results with your board members, share those results with your management team. All right. And once you go through that series of questions, you want to pull everything together. All right. So based on your, what the data is telling you from those 8 segments of the assessment, and based on your answers to the questions that we just focused on, what conclusions can you draw? What actions will you take, and how are you going to prioritize those actions? And then for those of us who are going through the leadership assessment, and actually anybody should ask themselves these questions: how does this relate to your leadership assessment? Because at the end of the day, you can assess your organization all day long, but everything rises and falls on leadership. So you want to make sure that you're also assessing your leadership ability to navigate these issues, right? So that you can move towards sustainability, strengthen your own leadership while you strengthen the capacity of your organization. Alrighty, so after you do that, you want to develop goals and objectives. And remember, we're focusing on SMART goals. They should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And these need to be done within the context of why you're doing the plan, and they should be in alignment with the goals and the objectives of your particular organization or group. And these specific goals and objectives at this point are the goals and objectives for your capacity building. So the next step is to actually develop your action plan. You want to be clear on what it is that needs to be accomplished, when it's going to be accomplished, who and how. So you want to establish not only tasks in your action planning, but you want to build in accountability. After that, you want to develop a budget. You look at all the activities in which you're going to be engaged. You want to develop a list of all the supplies and all the personnel who are needed and what it's going to cost to engage personnel, whether that be staff, whether that be consultants. You want to get a list of the supplies that you need, know how much that's going to cost. You want to know when you're going to need those particular resources, and most importantly, where the money is going to come from. And your next step is to actually write the plan. Every plan is going to be different, based on, the purpose of your plan and based on what it is you're assessing. But here's some common plan segments. You want to talk about the background and purpose for doing the plan. Then you want to talk about the situation in the environment, the situation within your work space. You want to talk about the methodology for assessment. The methodology could be your survey. It could be interviews or a number of other tools. You want to talk about what your findings were after you administered those tools. And then you want to have a section for the goals and objectives. And again, those goals and objectives pertain to the actual capacity building. And then you want to actually talk about what those strategies are, what the activities are, and you want to have a budget and timeline. And then the final thing I say, just do it. You want to implement your capacity building plan. All right. So I'm going to stop here in terms of sharing my screen. I want to share with you the workbook, and the workbook is available for those of us who are Nonprofit Utopia members. You can download it. I already shared it in the Nonprofit Utopia forum. And if you can hold on just one moment, I want to walk through that workbook. And you can download this workbook, in your, in the Nonprofit Utopia community. And this is free for Nonprofit Utopia members. And basically the goal of the workbook is to help you to interpret your results and then also help you frame how you're going to develop your blueprint for sustainability. All right, so the first part of the book is the instructions for the capacity assessment tool. It shows you how to score it and what the scores could indicate. And again, it's not a scientific method, but it is a good way for you to see at a glance, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and help you to prioritize issues and then develop a plan of action. So here is the first page. These are the segments that we just went over in the presentation. We're looking at board governance, financial management, and fundraising. And then the second page of the assessment focuses on human resources, your impact, and your program management. And then the last section of the first part is the networking. And again, we already went through that. And then here is the section on determining whether or not you are ready to engage in proposal writing at the state level in the state of Illinois. And for this segment, you have to have a perfect score. You have to have yes area in order to be eligible to apply for state of Illinois funds. Now this section here, this is meant for you to help you flesh out your findings. So, I mean, you can look at a glance and see where your strengths are. You'll see where the X's line up. But this section here helps you to flesh out how you're going to go about writing your report. So this first section, and for every section, you're going to answer the 3 questions. What areas did you score the highest? What areas did you score the lowest? And what patterns emerged? All right, you do that for every section. And then, after you do that, there'll be, you'll be able to talk about the conclusions. What conclusions have you drawn? How are you going to prioritize those areas? And then you're going to decide, what actions are you going to take, by when, by whom, who's responsible. And this column here basically gives you a status, lets us know, has it been completed, yes or no. And then this area here, this is an area where you can keep your notes and indicate those extenuating factors that could keep you from achieving your deadlines, or it could be things that you're writing. You think that these things can be accomplished within a certain date, but you have to make certain assumptions, right? So any assumptions you need to make can be put in the notes section. And then the next area is the budget. So, based on the activities that you're going to undergo, how much is it going to cost? So you need to know what resources that you need, what supplies, what people, how much they're going to cost. And then this section is giving you a justification. So for example, your line item, so suppose that you find that you need to engage in strategic planning. So one line item would be meeting facilitation. And then why are you doing that? You're gonna hire a consultant to actually help you go through a strategic planning process. How much is that gonna cost, right? So you do that throughout, and that will help you to develop a budget. And then this area here is basically a reminder of some common sections that you might include in your plan or your blueprint for sustainability. And if you engage in these activities, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be in a much, much better position to make sure that your organization is around for the long haul, and that your organization is raising significantly more money than they would had you not engaged in this type of planning process. All righty, I am the only one in this forum today. I know that there are people who are watching live in Facebook and other areas like YouTube and on other platforms. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please make sure that you put those questions down, make those comments. I will read those questions and comments and get back to you. If you are a member of the nonprofit Utopia community, I encourage you to post in the nonprofit Utopia forum. um, Post any questions you have, post any reflections you have. We're going to have office hours next Wednesday to, just do a reality check, to offer any assistance that you might need in building your individual leadership plan, offer any assistance that you might need to develop your capacity building blueprint. All righty, and before we go, I just want to share my screen one more time and share with you our contact information. And you can email me at valeriefleonard@nonprofitutopia.com. And again, if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, you can post any questions or concerns that you might have. You can download the workbook and start going through it. Just make sure that you post, and I'll chime in, and we can get other folks from the communities to chime in. And if you are interested in becoming a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, make sure you join us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And you can follow us on Twitter at Nonprofit Utopia, and you can find us on Facebook. All righty. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to end this meeting. I really appreciate your time and your consideration. And again, if you have any questions, I will make sure that I get to them just as soon as possible. All right. You take care. Bye-bye.